This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there, and once again, welcome to the program. I feel like this is kind of a throwback in that today we're doing the show by phone with Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos. Eric, great to catch up with you, as always.
Oh, likewise, Brian, and I appreciate your accommodating my technical issues today. I feel like I'm going to summon my inner Bill O'Reilly and say, we're going to do it live. Remember that one?
One of the most epic meltdowns ever caught on video.
It was fantastic.
So there's a lot
what
happening.
What shall we talk about this morning?
Okay,
yeah, where do you want to go?
Let's start with the low-hanging fruit. Oh, dear. Lindsey Graham is gone, and I know this is going to sound a lot like, hey, are you guys gloating? But, someone who loved war and who advocated for war as much as him, if people are expecting me to be, tearful and well, let's at least be respectful of him, I just can't find it in me.
Well, why should we? It's such a false piety. Were people expressing sadness, at least in the United States, when Stalin died, or how about Hitler? And I'm not saying that, Lindsey Graham is Stalin or Hitler, but he was still a despicable person. And, it's not unreasonable to be relieved that a despicable person is gone, because that puts an end to their despicability. Yes.
And it sounds like his sister is going to be the one appointed to fill out the remainder of his Senate term. It's very interesting to me, too, that among the strongest supporters of Lindsey Graham, evangelical Christians. And there's a disconnect there that I'm like, hey, you guys follow the Prince of Peace, right? How do you justify, this was one of our greatest advocates, there in Washington, D.C., this Lindsey Graham, because he loved to make war?
Well, they've been intellectually poisoned, I think, by the Darby and Schofield versions of the Bible that say that Christians must support the modern secular state of Israel, equating it with biblical Israel. So there's a lot of confusion there. Chuck Baldwin has gone on about this at length, and people who are interested in this subject might go back and review some of his columns. I think he explains it quite deftly. So, this kind of mental jujitsu has been applied to people to make them believe that even though they're Christians and they're supposed to be against things like, genocide and mass slaughter and all this sort of stuff, it's okay because, after all, we have to support Israel.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it comes down to. And, and this, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Lindsey Graham was one of the leading advocates for a proxy war against Russia, with our ally, there's the air quotes, of Ukraine. In fact, he was just in Ukraine mere hours before he came home and apparently dropped dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Another example. And he lustfully and almost smacking his lips at the thought of people being killed, Russians being killed. Again, a very unchristian thing to do. It wasn't merely that, this is a necessary thing. It's awful, but we have to do it. He took glee in it, sort of like Nimrata Haley, another person of that type who just seems to relish war. And the thing about it that really galls me is that these people always avoid war. They're of the mind that let's you and him fight. They love to send other people's kids to go fight and die in wars that they themselves don't fight in.
No, that's a good point. And it also leaves some questions hanging about another member of the Senate, that being Mitch McConnell. Do we believe the proof of life video that was released the other day, or is that something that AI fabbed up for us?
It's really weird, isn't it? Allegedly we're supposed to take this picture as evidence of proof of life, of him looking considerably younger than he looked the last time we saw him in public, and healthier and more alert, and wearing jeans in a hospital, sitting in a hospital bed. It just doesn't seem right. And supposedly he's been incommunicado for nearly a month now because he had a mild case of pneumonia and was briefly unconscious. It's very strange. And the aspect of this that interests me the most is you've got, bigwig Republicans saying that they spoke to him for 20 minutes and that he's perfectly coherent and he's on the road to recovery. If it turns out they're lying, what will be done about that? Probably nothing, just like nothing was done about the COVID criminals or any other criminals. But if it turns out to be the case, I think it will just be another case in point of how completely depraved, immoral, and corrupt our system has become.
Okay, so here's the $64,000 question on my mind. How much should we care? How much mental bandwidth should we be willing to, set aside for caring about who's still alive, who's still in charge, and what all's playing out in Washington, D.C.?
You raise a really good point, in that, it's going to continue to shamble on probably, irrespective of what we think about it, and getting exercised about it may not be especially healthy emotionally or psychologically. On the other hand, I do think that it is a healthy thing for us to come to grips with the nature of the system that we are saddled with, and just to understand that they have contempt for us. It's not merely that they lie to us; they have contempt for us. This is just like a brazen thing that they're doing. If he's actually dead or in a coma, for them to come out and say, "Oh, he's fine." I mean, it's like the old Soviet Union. Remember when we would watch the tottering, barely able to stand up Brezhnev and Andropov and Chernenko, and they would say, "Oh, he's got a headache. He's fine. He's really okay." Meanwhile, he's been picked up and bombed for the last 2 weeks.
Well, I definitely would suggest, keep an eye on what's going on, but I would also encourage people, wherever possible, focus your efforts where you're actually going to be able to move the needle. And that's, for a lot of people, sadly, talk radio listeners, I'm kind of looking your direction. It's all about, what are the latest talking points? What am I supposed to be upset about today? And we've got to do better than that if we want to hang on to what remains of our freedoms.
I absolutely agree with you. Did you happen to catch the interview that Tucker had the other day with Mike Adams, the guy who runs the Natural News website?
I did not see that. What were the highlights?
I recommend it. Well, I recommend it because they talked about this very subject, about how we're all sort of just feeling creeped out and appalled and depressed by the dishonesty, by the lying, by the corruption, and that it's important that we focus on better things. And better things meaning ourselves, our families, our communities, the people that we know. Focus on those good things and think about the things that are within your purview, your immediate environment, and then expanding that outward a little bit to your neighborhood and to your community. And stop, being dragged down by the awfulness of the world and focus on these other things instead.
Hear, hear. And I'm going to add one thought to that, too, and that is, a lot of people identify by, which side they're arguing for or which side makes them the maddest. And sometimes we just need a reminder that, who you are is defined by the choices that you make, not the talking points that you parrot, not the umbrage that you show, at this issue or that issue. It's what you actually do that takes action. That's what makes you who you are. And I say this from the standpoint of none of us are just passive victims who are just being carried this way and that way by the current of life. We can make choices. Paul Rosenberg gave a story about a study that was done on two identical twin brothers raised by an alcoholic father. And one of the twins ended up as a disaster, drunk, semi-criminal, and so on. The other twin ended up as an exemplary man, loving husband, father, productive person, and so on. And interestingly, when the researchers asked these men separately, why did you end up the way you are? Both of them gave the same answer, which was, with a father like mine, what would you do?
Interesting. Yeah. And Tucker talked about recovering our respect for truth and for facts. And I like to talk about that because I agree with them. I think that that's critically important. This ideological paradigm that they have shoved people into, where your views have to be in accordance or congruence with whatever political team you're on, whether it's the Republicans or the conservatives. Everything has to be square peg, round hole into that, as opposed to let's actually discuss what's true and what's false, and let's reject that which is false, regardless of our political point of view. That is how we recover the road to sanity.
Hear, hear. And sadly, for people who are in, the possession of, politics, they're politically possessed. That's a very hard thing to do. And it's not about, I'm the smartest person in the room, or look at me, I'm so aloof from everything. Again, it's about choosing where you allocate that mental bandwidth, where you allocate your moral energy. And we only have a finite amount of each of those things. So it's best if we can focus on putting those into efforts that actually matter, as opposed to just spinning our wheels and thinking, wow, I'm really, building up a head of steam here.
Sure enough. And I think that regardless, again, of where you fall on the political spectrum, when you encounter somebody who lies to your face, tells you something that is untrue, don't abide it. cross them off your Christmas list. They are not somebody that you can trust. This is important. There used to be respect for facts and truth in this country. Even as recently as the 90s, there was a big brouhaha back then that some people might remember where Clinton said, "I did not have sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky." And they were like, "What are you talking about, you greasy liar? Of course you did. You're gonna pedantically quibble about the nature of the act somehow. It means you didn't commit whatever the essential thing." And people were outraged by that. And Clinton faced the potential of being kicked out of office on account of it. But we have slipped so far now that almost everything that comes out of any politician's mouth is a lie. Excepting guys like Ron Paul and Thomas Massey.
Hear, hear. And by the way, speaking of lies, even the people that, we are taught from a very early age to revere and to hold above reproach and above questioning. And I'm going to just say it, law enforcement will lie to us as well. Case in point, flock cameras. There's been a lot of press and a lot of awareness raised over the last few weeks about how ubiquitous these cameras have become, how much they're watching, not just the roadways, but park pathways and school walkways and so forth. And here locally where I live in southern Idaho, one of the local police departments decided, well, it's time we do a social media campaign to tell people the truth about these things. But there's the same weaselly language. Why they don't take your heartbeat or they don't, read your mind as you go by. They just look at your make of your car and the license plate. And what they don't say is, and they store that information so that at some point, if somebody wants to find out every place you've been, that information remains.
Yeah, if you don't have privacy, you don't have freedom at the end of the day. And what we're talking about is out in public, where you, I think, do have a right to be free from surveillance, particularly by private companies. Bad enough when the government does it, but Flock is a private company. So you've got a private company that's obtaining all this data, which it then sells. So it monetizes your data, having acquired it in the public space, which is an outrage. This sort of thing cannot be tolerated. There has to be pushback against this. Another thing that's related, you and I talked a little bit about this off the air, these Ring cameras that a lot of people have, which are on private property typically, like your doorbell to see whether there's a porch pirate who snatches your Amazon package. The problem with it is that when you get one of these things, you agree to that whatever images and data are collected being sent up the chain, to the hive mind, and then again distributed to other parties that you have no control over. That's wrong. It's okay for a private business. If you walk into a store, they have security cameras because they have an issue with shoplifting. That's legitimate because you're not forced to go in the store.
Right.
On the other hand, you're effectively forced to go out in public unless you're going to be a shut-in. So, that changes the dynamic. This has got to be soundly and thoroughly rejected, and it's got to happen soon before it gets any more traction.
I think we've touched, too, on the idea, and sadly, there are a lot of apologists who will step up. Well, see, because of this, if you aren't doing anything wrong, this is helpful to the police, and, they find it, that it's easier to locate missing seniors with memory issues and so forth. And it doesn't change the fact that, look, if you live in a free country, the burden is on the government to justify why it is keeping its eye on any citizen. You don't have to justify your privacy to the government. The default setting is your privacy is a natural right, and government has to justify its reason for keeping an eye on you.
Certainly, that's the way that it ought to be. That argument is so specious. We could also catch more criminals by having random stop and frisks. How about that? You're just walking down the road, and because you're walking down the road or walking down the sidewalk, I should say, let's, subject people to random pat downs, make them produce their papers. We'd certainly catch more criminals that way. This is the danger of the argument, this idea that we should make it really easy for the enforcers of the laws to catch bad guys. The problem is then we all become bad guys effectively. And I don't want to live in East Germany or the Soviet Union, and I don't think you do either. Right.
It's not like we're all on probation and they just got to keep an eye on us. And of course, I think it also it affords this infallibility and moral stature to the watchers without actually going to the trouble of proving that these are people who can be trusted, who won't abuse it. And frankly, there's a lot of stories coming out about people in law enforcement, and this is human nature. at work here who, are stalking their exes or they have a vendetta against a particular person they've had a run-in with, and they use it for those nefarious purposes.
Yeah, without doubt. You hit on something very important, this presumption that the guardians are different people than we are, that they don't have the same foibles and weaknesses that we do. So you entrust these people with this power, and inevitably they are going to abuse it. Some of them will, inevitably, because some people are bad people. So you've got this issue of, cops using these flock cameras to figure out where some woman that they're interested in lives or where their ex is so they can stalk. That's horrific. And it's inevitable. That sort of thing is going to happen, which is why it must not be allowed to happen.
Hear, hear. And beside that, what's wrong tomorrow may not be the same thing that's wrong today. So, laws change and political winds can shift, and conduct that is totally okay today could be the subject of scrutiny tomorrow. If they're storing that information, just waiting for, you to catch the right person's eye or someone to take an interest, that's just inviting, again, that Stasi approach to everybody's a potential criminal. We just haven't figured out who yet.
Yeah, before people who are listening think or accuse me of being some kind of a liberal hippie, I should say I am all for going after bad guys. In other words, people who actually have done something harmful. If you do something harmful, go get them. I have no issue with law enforcement going after actual criminals. What I have an issue with is all of us being treated as if we were presumptively criminal people. That's horrible.
Yep. And privacy itself should not be, automatically considered, well, that's suspicious. You want privacy. You must have something to hide. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. It's also kind of treacly. It's sort of like it makes you feel like you're an 8-year-old again, and your parents are looking to see what's under your bed. I mean, this is the sort of thing free adults ought not to have to deal with that. We have privacy. It's none of your business what I'm up to. If I'm doing something that is potentially criminal and I'm giving evidence of it, okay, I accept that. But just your worry that I might be doing something that that you're concerned about, that doesn't work for me. Hear, hear. I think it comes down to, no matter how convenient some police agencies may find this degree of surveillance, it still doesn't change the fact that this is consistent with a police state. I'm using police language here, by the way. Well, we found evidence of things that were consistent with child pornography. Well, this is consistent with a police state, and it definitely moves us in that direction. So why would we want to even, tread toward that?
Yeah, and there's a degree of hypocrisy here, I think, as well. I wonder how many of these cops who are saying nothing to worry about here with the flock cameras would mind having a flock camera put inside their bedroom or their bathroom. How about that, at their house? So everything that goes on in their bedroom and bathroom can be uploaded to the hive mind, and we can all find out what they're up to.
Hey, turnabout's fair play. Let's take a moment to touch on things automotive. Was looking over some of the vehicles that you've been reviewing, and I have to admit, the Toyota Tacoma kind of caught my eye. What's the lowdown on the midsize pickup from Toyota?
Well, let's see where to begin. And I'm a fan of the Taco. Let me preface what I'll say about it with that. I'm sitting in one right now, and it's remarkable how big these trucks have gotten. The Tacoma and the competitors in the segment, which includes the Chevy Colorado and the GMC Canyon, of course, the Nissan Frontier, they have gotten really big. I did some dimensional checking, and it turns out that the so-called midsize truck that I'm sitting in right now is actually larger dimensionally than a circa 2001 Tundra, which was a half-ton truck, back in 2001, and seems almost puny by comparison. So they've gotten a lot bigger. Now, one area where they've gotten smaller, the Tacoma used to be available with a V6. It isn't anymore, and neither are any of the others in the segment, except for the Nissan Frontier. They've all been under pressure to reduce their carbon footprint and do a slightly increased gas mileage. So now they all have turbocharged 4-cylinder engines or hybrid augmented 4-cylinder engines. The upside is they're a lot more powerful. The base engine in this truck is now 228 horsepower, and you can go all the way up to like 347 horsepower. But the really neat thing about the Tacoma is it is the very last midsize truck that you can buy. The last truck you can buy new in this country, still available with a manual transmission. So get them while you still can.
So I have to ask too, do the tacos come with, do they have some of that extraneous helpful software? I know you were talking about the Honda Pilot that wanted to put the brakes on no matter whether there was anything in front of you or not. Do they come with the same safety features as some of these other vehicles?
Yeah, unfortunately they do. Toyota, along with Subaru and Honda, they're kind of among the early adopters of some of this particularly creepy and invasive technology that is on the cusp of becoming mandatory in all new cars, including the drowsy/distracted driver monitor that goes into effect in 2027. And automated emergency braking becomes a federal requirement in 2029. So a lot of these car companies have just kind of jumped the gun a little bit and have begun putting this tech into their vehicles. So yeah, that's a downside. And I haven't had a chance yet, but I intend to look into seeing whether there's any easy way for the layman, I don't want to have to be a software coder, to just defeat these things, kind of like, buckling the seatbelt and then sitting on it so you can get the seatbelt minder to shut up.
That is kind of problematic, and actually sometimes I get a stubborn streak when the seatbelt chime starts going off. It's like, I hear you and I don't care. You can be as loud as you want.
Isn't it annoying? They call it, I really, again, I'm a linguist, I'm a writer, and so words mean what words mean matters to me, and they call it a seatbelt reminder. Well, when it dings once, that's a reminder. When it keeps dinging at you, it's pestering you, it's punishing you. I'm well aware that I haven't buckled up for safety. The car's just irritated with me because I'm not obeying the car.
No, I think that's a fair call. And again, I would encourage anybody who wants to check out Eric's take on not just the Toyota Tacoma, but lots of other vehicles. He's got one of the best automotive columns that you're going to find. You can check it out at ericpetersautos.com. I'll include a link in today's show notes. Eric, great as always to catch up with you. The world is still an exciting place. I trust it will be this time next week as well.
I hope so.
All right, we'll talk to you then.
Thank you, sir.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.